I'd like to open up the next session and welcome to the stage the Vice President and Chief Analytics Officer at IBM and the Chief Economist, Martin Fleming.
Thank you. So I thought I would take about 20-25 minutes or so and share with you a point of view in terms of some of the work that we're doing in the artificial intelligence space, and then have an opportunity to answer questions, debate, argue, whatever you'd like to do about what we're seeing and maybe what you're seeing as well. So for this audience, this is going to be a bit of a high-level overview. It's really intended to cover the waterfront in a whole series, a whole set of issues. Typically, when I speak to business audiences, I like to begin by providing a little bit of an illustration or a little bit of an example of what we mean when we say artificial intelligence. You know, most folks kind of think about this kind of scary idea of robots taking over the world. And I often use the analogy, which comes as a surprise, that many of us are using the capability every day. You send a text message and it predicts the word you're trying to type. That's artificial intelligence, right? So anytime you get into that sort of predictive mode where you see the tool helping to make us more productive or just to make life simpler, that's an artificial intelligence application, however simple or complex it might be. One of the other illustrations that I use is the ice cream shop. Imagine that you're the owner, the entrepreneur of an ice cream shop. You would really like to be able to know what your revenue is going to be from month to month or quarter to quarter. There are a lot of reasons to know that. You have to order supplies and materials, have to hire staff and resources. You need to be able to plan financially. So the ability to be predictive is helpful from a business point of view as well as from a personal point of view. As an economist, you know, we've been doing these kind of forecasts for decades now. But typically, this sort of cross-sectional forecasting has been very difficult. You typically maybe explain 30 or 40% of the variation, and that's not real helpful. But now with the much larger body of unstructured data that we have access to, these kinds of models can be much more accurate. We have not only the typical structured data that is available to describe a given situation or relationship, but unstructured data. In the case of our ice cream shop, you might like to know about other activities that are going on in the neighborhood. What's attracting a crowd? Is there a movie theater nearby that's playing a popular movie, current hit? Is there a competitor who's offering a sale or somehow trying to attract some traffic? All of those inputs help to get us typically, as you would know, in excess of 90% of the ability to understand what's happening from month to month, quarter to quarter, or whatever the predictive model is that we're trying to drive. So the message that I try to leave with, shall I say, civilian audiences is this is not really as mysterious and scary as it sometimes seems. We're just trying to understand the probabilities of events occurring and look at the most likely potential outcome as a way of helping to improve decision making. So as we move from the more personal or consumer applications into the business-to-business environment, we think that the capability is already beginning to have significant impact and over time will likely have quite profound impact. So we see the transformation of business really occurring at an increasingly rapid pace, and with the artificial intelligence tools being part of this. So one of the rules of thumb that we use quite frequently is we're not going to fix we're not going to put analytics, or we're not going to apply artificial intelligence to a broken business process. We're going to fix the process and apply the tools to it. So the benefit of the capability is not so much in the tool or the mathematics itself, it's in the transformation, it's in the restructuring that's all part and parcel of the work that's occurring. And that's been a little bit of I think, part of the challenge that more traditional IT capabilities have faced over the years, where you have IT teams creating tools and capabilities and kind of throwing them over the wall to be used, and they're not really part of a more fundamental transformation of an organization, of a business model, or of a capability. We very much view the two as being married together. And also that it takes much more than just the solution itself, just the AI solution itself. So we, in fact, focus on 4 different areas. First and foremost, of course, is leadership. We need our senior leaders in our organization to not only buy into the value and buy into the need, but also to be proactive, to be supportive, and oftentimes to require that processes change, that tools change, and that actions be taken. We spent enormous amount of time working on a capability to forecast our revenues. Spent a lot of time educating our finance team, but it wasn't until our CEO said we are going to use this process that everything sort of turned around and it became the standard procedure. So leadership is a critical element here. Secondly, I've talked about business process transformation. So we're transforming the business process as we begin to deploy the tools. But oftentimes, and now, of course, in the current environment, there are really quite significant challenges, particularly in the space around data. In all organizations, I would say, maybe all is a bit too extreme, in virtually every organization, data exists in silos. And trying to bring it together in an integrated way, and to be able to have trusted sources of data. Just had this conversation this morning before I came over here. We're looking at the exact same set of data. Somebody's gone through a whole set of transformations of that data, and somebody else has not, and they're telling me it's the same set of data. Well, it's not. And so the governance and the management of data, the ability to integrate data as a trusted source, has become even more important, because now in an artificial intelligence context, we're dealing with much larger, very, very massive data sets that have to be governed and managed quite carefully. Along the same lines is the transformation of the infrastructure. We oftentimes hear discussion around cloud computing. Well, it's a variable cost. That's true. It's a variable cost, and it's useful, it's helpful, but there's much more. As we deploy software as a service solutions, we're managing those solutions in a very different way. They're being updated and new versions being deployed on a regular basis. So the whole management system of how the infrastructure is managed and how the versioning of the solutions are managed changes from the more traditional on-premise structure that's existed for many years. So of course, there is also the scaling up and scaling down of the cloud computing space, which for many applications, oftentimes in the consumer environment, but in many different environments, want to be able to take advantage of the cloud capability to scale up and scale down as seasonality and business fluctuates from period to period. So very different data environment, very different infrastructure environment. And then finally, a focus on retraining and education. This is a new world. If there's one rule of thumb that continues to apply, nobody likes change. So change management is an important part of what we're doing here. And we have to get our various teams across our organization to do things in a very different way. So all this is part on a very critical element of being able to be successful with the kind of AI solutions that we're beginning to deploy. So let me give you a couple of examples of spaces that we're working in. And you wouldn't be surprised to find out that each of them is going to be related to where there are large amounts of data. So hopefully we can find places where there's meaningful business value to be created, but also very large sets of data to allow us to create those solutions. And certainly the sales and marketing space is one. Typically, CRM, customer relationship systems, generate large amounts of opportunity and client relationship data. We can pair those opportunities with the transactions that we see in the ledger, so we know which opportunities turn into wins and which are losses. We can oftentimes bring in human resource data to understand the role that sellers are playing, the role that managers are playing in those transactions. Whether they're positive or negative is always debatable in many instances. The role that third parties are playing, business partners are playing in those transactions. So it becomes a very robust environment to be able to improve the ability to engage with clients, provide a very deep view of the business, move beyond the more traditional approach, which is looking at an income statement, a profit and loss statement, to understand what's occurring within the business, to have a much deeper, more robust view of the relationships and the opportunities that exist. Clearly, we want to be able to bring in marketing, response, and leads data to feed all of that. And that, of course, becomes an even more significant challenge. But that's one space where there's an enormous amount of work going on. Second place is pricing, algorithmic pricing. We all have that experience every day, perhaps, when we get on various websites and we're given a price for a product we're looking to buy. In many instances, that price is uniquely calculated for you, given who you are, your circumstances, your location, your demographics, your income. We do some things quite similar because we have clients in particular industries, in particular geographies, buying particular products. We have a vast array of products. So every transaction, every bid, we're looking at how can we best balance the need to win the transaction as well as achieve our financial objectives at the same time. So it's a discussion around optimality. We want to get to the point. The first derivative is zero, right? The maximum point where we're not necessarily sacrificing too much profit, but on the other hand, we're getting a fair share of wins in these transactions. We have found in the past, before we were able to get to a more sophisticated approach, that we oftentimes price too low for large clients, but price too high for smaller clients. So be able to get that better balance while still achieving our financial results is something that we've been able to do now across a broad range of transactions. And it's the same kind of capability that my peers in other organizations are doing as well. Another place where we have spent a great deal of time is around sales recommendation engines, right? And again, from our personal lives, we all have experience. You get on Netflix. If you like this video, you're going to like this video, or on Amazon. If you bought this, you'll like that, or this book, you'll like that book, etc. There's a lot of recommendation engine work going on across the various technology firms. We do very similar work. We have a range of products, very difficult oftentimes for our sellers to know what the next best need or the next best offering will be for a client, so recommendation engines are important. We've also done a great deal of work focusing on our third-party partners. We have business partners. We want to be able to help them engage with customers. We want to be able to pass sales leads to them, have them be in a position where they have the bandwidth, they have the skill, they have the customer relationship that they can successfully take that lead, meet the need of the customer, and carry forward with the relationship and the opportunity. That historically has been a huge challenge for our organization. We've made a lot of good progress over the past year or two. So a lot of applications in the sales and marketing space. Lots of data, lots of big challenges, really a really fertile ground in which to apply these AI capabilities. Second space where there's a lot of work going on is in the supply chain space. So for an organization like IBM, when we think about supply chains, there are goods supply chains, but it turns out, as you may know, that's a relatively small part of the IBM business overall. It's about, our systems business is about 10% of the total. Much larger proportion of our business now is the people supply chain. We're a very large services organization. About 2/3 of our revenue is generated by services. So the ability to understand transactions that are occurring, what it's going to require, first of all, from a manufacturing and a systems, a products perspective, to be able to move a set of components and capabilities through a manufacturing process across many countries, many geographies, and get that product to the client at the right point at the right time. We have one rule in our systems business: we never miss a sale, even if it's at 11:59 p.m. on the last night of the quarter. It's moving ahead, and the supply chain works very, very efficiently. But there are risks, of course, right? We've even recently we've seen lots of weather activity. Obviously there are other risks, whether it's earthquakes or social unrest or government issues. Right now, of course, a lot of time being spent on the question of tariffs and what the right path is in dealing with additional expense. So the goods supply chain gets a lot of focus and a lot of attention. Again, a lot of data issues. I go back to the chart of the couple of charts ago. A lot of focus on data. How do we bring all this data together to give the folks who are managing the supply chain a view of where some of the potential risks are? From a services point of view, it's a bit more challenging because we want to be able to have the teams with the skill necessary to deliver the service be available when the transaction is agreed to and completed, and the client expects that we're going to begin a service to deliver services. If any of you are, I'm sure many of you are clients of service delivery firms. When you sign the agreement, you expect the service delivery team is going to show up the next day or the next Monday. Well, it probably took 6 months worth of planning to have the right skill at the right place at the right point in time to make all that happen. So the ability to forecast which transactions are likely to occur, what the probability of that transaction is that's likely to occur, when it's likely to occur, and what the skill profile, the labor profile is, and match that with the labor supply. And the labor supply can come from a number of different sources. You have folks coming off previous engagements that are finishing up. You have folks who are reskilling, and you have those who have been recruited and hired for an engagement. So to bring that supply view with the demand view and the associated probabilities together is a challenge that we've been working on and have made some significant progress with as well. So that supply chain space is another place where we've seen an enormous amount of activity. The human resources space is another place. Lots of data, lots of interesting questions, lots of work that's gone on. Very, very interesting set of initiatives. But another industry where, as you may know, we as an organization have spent a lot of time is in the healthcare space. And in fact, here in the Raleigh area, the Lineberger Center has done a great deal of work in terms of looking at the ability of Watson to diagnose help with the diagnoses of various cancer cases, and gone back through, in one particular case, 1,000 different cases, reconfirmed over 700 of them, and identified another 300 where there were additional diagnoses, additional insights to be generated as well. So the healthcare space is also another space that looks like it's receiving a great deal of benefit as a result of the work that's gone on. When we step back, though, and we've been doing a lot of work with some of the job posting data, and we look at where the jobs are being posted for AI skills as a way of understanding where the work is going on, there are really two industry segments where much of this is occurring. One, of course, is the technology industry. The other is financial services, which in many respects is kind of a close cousin of the technology industry, happens to deal with financial flows, but still looks very similar to the technology industry. The other industries, including healthcare and manufacturing, are a little bit, account for a little bit less of the hiring that's going on. But lots and lots of activity in the financial services space and in the technology industry. So as we think about this transformation that's occurring, enterprise by enterprise, beginning to scale up, think of an S-curve. We're kind of at the bottom part of the S-curve, kind of barely sort of rounding the corner here. As we begin to see more of the momentum occur, moving beyond just the U.S. A lot of what's going on today is centered in the U.S. and to some degree Western Europe. I was in Japan the week before last, and many of our clients in Japan are just beginning to understand what some of the possibilities are. So we're seeing this spread industry by industry, geography by geography, just as many other technologies and many other products have done historically. But we're beginning to see this shift occur across different industries and different geographies. There is rapidly beginning to be a much broader macroeconomic impact. And the other side of the coin of all this enterprise transformation is labor market or workforce transformation. So we're talking about how work is being done differently. When we talk about transformation, we're talking about changing the way work is done. Means new tasks, and new tasks mean new skills. So all of this is impacting the broader global economy and will have broader implications as we go along. Now, this is not the first time. This is not the first time the world has gone through such a change. If we had more time, I'd tell you about my favorite story with the power loom. But you probably recognize that this is the kind of transformation that has occurred in a very significant way 3-4 times over the course of industrial history over the past 250 years. Every time, the claim is this is different. It's the end of work as we know it. But every time, we as humans want to be productively engaged in some activity, and we continue to see the economic benefit. I assert, and I think there's a reasonable probability, that we'll see a similar process unfold over the course of the next few decades. But nonetheless, the transformation in the broader context will be challenging. It will be difficult. There'll be winners and there'll be losers, and that's part of what we want to be able to focus on to help encourage that transformation in a way that there are benefits to be broadly shared. We've gone through a period over the course of the past almost 20 years now where it's not only been technology that's been transforming. There are a much broader set of economic transformations. And that's what makes this a little bit controversial, because we have here in the U.S. A much more competitive environment, particularly with imported products, as well as the introduction of the more traditional automation that's occurred in many industries. And the message that I try to communicate is we've gone from the old technology, the rules-based technology, where in particular industries like automotive and electronics, robotics is being put in place based on a rules-based technology where if the robot sees a certain condition, it takes a certain action. And it's designed as a capital replacement for labor. We're now talking about a new technology that's learning, it's reasoning, it's understanding, and more often than not providing productivity benefits to workers. Now, I would never assert that no one will lose their job as a result of AI technology. There will be displacement. There will be productivity improvements. But the early evidence seems to suggest that there's a bit of a shift with less displacement and more productivity benefit as we go forward. But all of this gets confused, of course, because of the very significant now competitive environment that we see, particularly here in the U.S., with the U.S. and China, and the number of jobs in the manufacturing sector that have disappeared as a result of import competition. So being able to sort out the effect of automation versus import competition and the movement of the new from the old technology to the new technology has made well, it's keeping folks like myself employed full time. At the same time, of course, the third force that's at work here is very significant demographic changes. So there are the global population is aging across many countries, particularly in North America, Western Europe, Japan, even in China with the one-child policy. We're seeing the potential for a shrinking labor force. So with a global labor force, at least in the industrialized countries, that's growing more slowly, we need the productivity benefits to be able to continue to grow income and wealth over the long term, right? Because the long-term growth is going to be the sum of productivity growth and labor force growth. If labor forces are growing slowly or in some cases declining, we need more productivity growth if we're going to get more income and wealth increases, growth rates. So that's another confounding factor here, which makes this discussion even more interesting. So in this context, as a large global player who is expected to have a point of view, we're focused in a number of areas, trying to impact not only the ability to create more skill and more capability, but also to impact policy and the thinking that policymakers have on the topic. So one of the places where we've spent a huge amount of time and made a significant effort is education. Not surprising. New skills required. We have a program that we call PTech, which focuses on 14 years of education. So we provide support to a number of school systems, not only in the U.S., but globally as well, to help create for young people a 14-year program with mentoring, with a focus on high-growth occupations, as well as opportunities for internship and co-op type employment. All of this is intended to be supportive of what we have called new-collar jobs, the kind of skills that are going to be necessary to support the new technology as it moves forward. In addition, putting a great deal of focus on mid-career transition, mid-career training. We all, and I include myself, we all need to continue to learn, progress, and build our skills. And give you my own opinion, the attitudinal change that we need is we need to help workers understand going forward that learning doesn't stop when you complete high school or even an undergraduate program. It's going to be a long-term learning effort to continue to keep pace with the technology. Many organizations, IBM included, have been putting a lot of focus on such training, reskilling, retraining. We expect that we're going to see this area continue to grow over time. It's probably the case, certainly here in the U.S., that we're underinvesting generally, and we have many programs that are likely we would judge to be ineffective, so improving the effectiveness of such programs. And then third and finally, really just thinking more broadly. What are the responsibilities that we all have? As business leaders, as individuals, what do we expect from our government leaders as we think about the kind of transformation that we're just now heading down the road towards? What responsibility do we take for ourselves? What responsibility do we have as business leaders? And what do we expect from our political leaders, our elected officials, as we go through this transformation in the years ahead? So developing and being able to be articulate about a new social contract is a place where we're also spending a great deal of time and effort. And then finally, very, very important topic around the issue of ethics, transparency, and the purpose of deploying these sorts of solutions. One of the commitments that IBM has as an organization, and I think it's turned out to be a very important value proposition, is we will not share client data only if the client agrees. That's the only circumstance. That's not the case. There's a bit of a divide, as you probably know, in the technology industry, right? 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when we all signed up for Facebook, we really didn't understand what we were signing up for, and data has been shared quite widely. Likewise with some of the other services. As a business-to-business organization, we have a very different point of view around security, privacy, confidentiality. Very much focused on ethics. A lot of focus around image recognition, the ability of image recognition to recognize faces and people as they should be. And transparency. The work that we're doing in the lab, the MIT IBM Watson lab around explainability and transparency of AI solutions is a challenge. It's a place where a lot more work needs to be done, but the ability to be able to explain why a recommendation or a prediction or a solution is what it is an important part of what's yet to be fully solved. So let me stop there. We've got a few minutes remaining. Please to argue, debate, answer questions, take your comments.
Who's got a question?
On the other side.
I'm Joe Fox from Ashland. On one of your early slides, you had a bullet that said, simplifying the pricing approval process and increasing sales.
Right.
Could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So this gets to my transformation point. The way that we have historically provided prices to sellers who communicate them to our clients is each one of the business leaders in a given geography will sit down with their team and create a grid, spreadsheet essentially, of prices. Their best guess as to what they think the appropriate price is. But then, of course, the sellers are always saying, not competitive. I need a better price. So consequently, over time, you get all kinds of approvals, right, to offset where you're pointing down, right, to offset that, right? So different layers of management, depending on the size of the transaction, have to be able to approve. Well, all this slows things down tremendously. One of the most important benefits that we see across almost every AI solution is speed, creating speed. Whether it's diagnosing patients in a healthcare environment, the ability to come back to a physician with a recommended diagnosis quickly, or whether it's an intelligence, a military environment. It's the speed of reaction, and it's the same thing in a competitive marketplace. So the ability of a seller to submit a bid, have it configured with the appropriate parts and components and elements and delivery, as well as the price, and do that almost in real time to respond back to the customer, number one, has made us more responsive to our customers. Number two, has eliminated enormous amount of hours where very expensive sales leaders are reviewing proposals as opposed to building relationships with customers. And a lot of finance people, instead of doing finance, are looking at pricing proposals. So a lot of that effort then gets redirected in a more productive way, and we're in a position to be more responsive to our clients and do it in a more timely way. I'll give you one other final little interesting point. Our competitors understand how we used to do things. So if you're a competitor from IBM, you go into your client and say, oh, you know what, why don't you ask IBM to reprice that? And they know it's going to take 3 weeks. But now, of course, it's done in no time. So it's created an additional source of competitive advantage around the speed notion. Next question. Somebody's got a question.
Hi, Steve Moskowitz from Integris. A very interesting talk, and I think one of the things we struggle with as a B2B company is on the data side. Mm-hmm. You talk about getting a lot of data into the cloud. You talk about with Watson, with the health systems where there's data from many sources. Where we struggle is we actually now have multiple cloud providers that we work with. Yes. And everybody has their own protection of their own data, and so we're sort of losing sight of who owns the data anymore, and how do you really access it? Where do you see that going in terms of the AI systems being able to really pull from multiple data sources more effectively, and how do we kind of work through that challenge?
So we have certainly seen the same thing. Now, I focus internally, so I can't speak about our what we're doing externally, except to say we did last week make a product announcement around multi-cloud technology, so that whether the data is sitting on the Amazon cloud or the Microsoft cloud or the IBM cloud, it can be integrated and brought back together. So there's more and more of these integrated tools to be able to manage data that are beginning to become available for exactly the reason that you're citing. We see this in organization after organization, so that's why the development teams have been focused on creating this multi-cloud technology. Secondly, I'm just hard over on governance. We use the term governance, and it sounds very ethereal. Governance is nasty. You got to stop people from doing what they have been doing for 10 years and start doing things in an organized, managed fashion. And that's the tough part, right? Because nobody wants to give up what they have. But it's that behavior, that's an organizational behavior that now is becoming a very critical element as we begin to integrate these data sets to get the value of the much larger data. It requires a lot of change, and sometimes that's not as easy or as pleasant as it might seem. Question over here.
Thank you. Richard Boyd with Tanjo. I was expecting you to say that the battle between capital and labor had been convincingly won by capital, of course. But it sounded like you said the struggle continues. Yeah. Do you not see that or do you feel that the balance is heavily in favor now, or more so in favor of capital, and will continue to increase, or do you think we're hitting some kind of equilibrium there?
No, I'm not sure we're at an equilibrium, but I would make a distinction, first of all, between the manufacturing sector and the much larger services sector. So certainly you're right, in the manufacturing sector, capital replacing labor, particularly in those industries like automotive, like electronics, where the form factor is large and lends itself to robotic behavior. A lot of those gains have occurred and will continue to occur. A lot of the other industries, of course, textiles, apparel, toys, have been much more impacted by Chinese competition, if you're here in the U.S. I'm asserting that as we move from the old technology to the new technology, the playing field changes, and the balance between capital substitution and the benefits of labor from being more productive are going to shift. I'll repeat myself when I said I would never assert that there will be no jobs lost. There will be jobs lost, and that's why we focus on reskilling and fundamentally, in fact, the work that we're doing. I saw Daniel come in earlier with our team at IBM is looking at how occupations and jobs are being redefined with tasks fundamentally shifting and requiring new skills. But that's all of the productivity, the opportunity for productivity gain, particularly in the services sector, as much as any place else because of the nature of the new technology. Other questions?
Martin, maybe one last question.
Sure.
You mentioned in your talk the impact that these technologies can have on sales and marketing and certainly on HR functions as labor forces change. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the impact that is about to come to the way companies innovate or develop new products.
Yeah, so development is certainly a space that's been, I'll be candid to tell you, a challenge for us. Developers don't like to, number one, keep track of what they do every day. So without data, it's hard to do much of anything. But certainly as we begin to get greater insight and more detailed insight into the nature of customer demands, that is certainly helpful to the development teams. But I do think that we're going to find over the course of the next few years a way to be able to help manage the development resources a bit more effectively to help the teams focus on where the best opportunities are. But that's been a real challenge for us.
Okay, let's thank Martin for a great talk.
Terrific.